Since the very first Final Fantasy game, monsters have played a crucial role in defining the series' challenge and immersive gameplay experience. But while some monsters have become staples of the franchise, such as bombs, cactuars, and Malboras, going on to appear in nearly every game, there are countless obscure creatures that only made brief, sometimes baffling appearances. These oddities often surprised players with their peculiar mechanics, strange designs, or the sheer difficulty of even encountering them. It's of course easy to remember the familiar faces of Final Fantasy bestiaries, but many of these lesser-known monsters remain shrouded in mystery, often only recognised by the most dedicated of fans. From elusive one-time bosses to enemies that required entire questlines dedicated to them, the Final Fantasy series is full of monsters that have slipped under the radar or are just weird. We've talked about obscure and bizarre monsters before on this channel, and in response, many of you mentioned some truly strange creatures that we didn't mention last time, but you felt deserved their time in the spotlight. In this video, we're therefore showcasing some of the ones you, the commenters, suggested. So without much further ado, here are 7 more of the most obscure monsters in Final Fantasy, with the caveat that we will only be using one monster per game. Oh, and if you want to watch the previous video, there will be a link in the description below. Many of the most iconic creatures in Final Fantasy have appeared in more than one game, but there are some that, despite appearing regularly, can still fly under the radar. One such case comes via the diminutive little fellow, or specifically a set of 3 fellows known as movers. They first appeared in Final Fantasy V, but have gone on to appear in numerous other titles that followed. Often hunted for their rewards, but rarely spoken of, movers are tiny red spheres most often found in the very last dungeons of their respective games, which is surprising given their appearance. But don't be fooled, movers represent some of the nastiest enemies in Final Fantasy history, and this is then shown by the rewards for beating them. Movers are most well known for having next to no HP but massive evasion stats. And as they bounce around, they can pounce by unleashing the deadly Delta attack, which the player rarely sees coming. They also carry other nasty attacks such as Virus Strike in Final Fantasy IX or Meltdown in Final Fantasy VI. So breaking their formation of 3 isn't a guarantee of safety either. The most well-known aspect of movers, though, is the sheer amount of experience and ability points they grant, often making them the prime source of grinding for players wanting to max out the levels of their parties. But due to how rare the encounters can be, many casual players may never even have seen them. Now, chronologically, movers have not been seen in a Final Fantasy title for some time, but they did resurface via Crisis Core Reunion. But with their most recognisable appearance being in the swamp area of the Northern Crater in the original Final Fantasy, it stands to reason that we may see these little orbs of terror return in the final entry of the remake project. One of the most well-known weird enemies, and often cited in our comments of the last video, was the Hell House from Final Fantasy VII. With such a bizarre appearance being a literal house with mechanical limbs, the Hell House was so well known for being weird that it was brought back for the Final Fantasy VII Remake as a full-fledged boss fight. But what if we told you that the Hell House wasn't the only example of a walking house being a Final Fantasy enemy? In Final Fantasy IX, located on the Forgotten Continent, the party could encounter the Armstrong, another house-like enemy. It came equipped with a giant cannon that liked to use gravity-style attacks that could cut party members' HP by half or even down to 1 through its Matra Magic attack. According to the Final Fantasy IX Ultimania, the Armstrong is actually held up by cats, which matches up with the cat motif found on the weather vane that sits atop its roof. Where the Hell House was purely mechanical, the Armstrong is actually organically run. Armstrong wasn't an especially difficult enemy, certainly for the point in the game in which it was encountered, but given how iconic and well-remembered the Hell House was, and still is, it's noteworthy that such a bizarre design concept was actually used more than once across the franchise. Many of the comments in the previous video pointed towards enemies found in Final Fantasy VII, which is no stranger to bizarre enemies, as mentioned with the Hell House. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. From the pendulum-riding Gyrofelgo to the enemy found in the Northern Crater known only as Christopher. There are a plethora of weird, bizarre, and unique monster designs present in the famed entry. But there is one enemy that stands above the rest in terms of being just plain weird, and that mantle belongs to the Grangalan. Appropriately found on the beaches near the Gold Saucer, the Grangalan is best described as a living Matryoshka doll, but shaped like an egg. Grangalan's main attack was to open its mouth and spit out smaller versions of itself, aptly named Grangalang Jr., which themselves can do the same thing, spitting out even smaller Grangalang Juniors. While the Grangalang had access to other attacks and can inflict darkness on the party, it was the sheer irritation of spawning numerous other enemies and delaying the end of the battle that made it stand out, as well as its truly peculiar appearance and gameplay application. Grangalan made appearance in many other Final Fantasy titles, with slightly different variations on its appearance, being more mechanical in the First Soldier and more runic and ancient in Crisis Core. It also appeared in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, found in the Gongaga region. But even though it was made to look more advanced as the games went on, Grangalan has always been the egg that made more eggs. Final Fantasy VIII didn't just have one of the most bizarre and obscure enemies in the history of the franchise, but it also had one of the most bizarre and unique side quests to accompany it. In order to encounter the little blue alien known as Poo-Poo, the player had to first find its UFO. By travelling to various points across the world map, the player could get into battle with the flying saucer, except the battle wasn't much of a battle, as the UFO just floated on by, holding a bizarre object like a crop circle or an Egyptian pyramid. On the fourth encounter, the UFO finally landed, allowing the party to attack it. On taking a pretty small amount of damage, the UFO broke and flew off to the crater where Balamb Garden once was. Finding the Poo-Poo amongst the ruins of its flying saucer was not met with anger or sadness from the little blue creature, but a request instead. Poo-Poo asked for elixirs, similar to what Magic Pots had previously done. After giving the Poo-Poo 5 elixirs, it simply said thank you, left, and gave you a copy of its Triple Triad card as a reward. Poo-Poo has since been referenced in many other Final Fantasy games, being one of Lulu's doll options in Final Fantasy X, a summon in Dissidia, and a downloadable monster in Final Fantasy XIII too. But given how it only appeared as a monster in one game, it's interesting to see how often its image has been reused since. The Great Sea Trench in Final Fantasy V was an optional dungeon that's unlocked as the game concluded. It housed one of the tablets needed for the sealed weapons and also the ultimate time magic, Meteor. But beyond these elements, the Great Sea Trench was also home to a collection of some of the most bizarre enemies ever seen in the franchise. All of the enemies found in the Great Sea Trench were simply known as unknowns. As such, they took the shape of a blob, a slime, a worm, and a skeleton. And the strange thing about the unknowns was that they were the only instance of a collection of completely different enemies sharing the same name. All of the enemies also had different stats and different attacks, with their only similarity being a weakness to Holy due to their undead affinity. Even stranger still was that 2 out of the 5 unknown enemies actually shared the exact same sprite. Alongside the slime, skeleton, and worm variants, there were 2 different blob variants that looked identical at first glance, but ended up taking up 2 different entries in the bestiary. Entry number 168 was particularly weird as it could try and use Delta Attack, similar to the movers previously mentioned, but was unable to due to a lack of MP. Plant-like enemies are not rare across the franchise, with a plethora of them being based on various flowers, weeds, and greenery. Even the ever-dreaded Malbora is shown to be plant-like in nature, and then there's the Ochu. But the very first hunt presented in Final Fantasy XII took this to a new level with the Rogue Tomato. Described in-game as a vexing representative of the deadly Nightshade family, the Rogue Tomato was quite simply a small humanoid figure with a tomato for a head. Found outside Rabanasta on the Dalmasca Ester Sands, the Rogue Tomato had access to the Flame Breath attack and needed to be defeated twice to complete the hunt as it ran away after losing half of its HP. In most art depicting the Rogue Tomato, including the Hunt Primer found in-game, the beast had fangs protruding from its open maw. But the actual model lacked fangs, instead just being a tomato with no discerning features at all. The vegetable theming then continued in Final Fantasy XII with the Mandragoras, a recurring theme of monster introduced in, you guessed it, Final Fantasy VII. But here, the inspiration was actually Final Fantasy XI, as the exact same model was used, and this continued as they reappeared in Final Fantasy XIV. That then brings us on to our last entry, and for this, we wanted to take a look at one of the most unique boss fights Final Fantasy has ever had. Yes, we're talking about the Phantom Train. Now, Final Fantasy VI is home to many memorable and obscure boss fights, but never before had the dungeon itself been the boss fight in question. Here, the Phantom Train was very much that, serving as both a dungeon and a boss. As players moved through the train carts, they needed to navigate puzzles, fight various ghost enemies, and interact with friendly spirits who offered them items and services like the infamous ghost waiter who could even serve them a meal. The dungeon portion also contained its own obscure boss fight in Siegfried, a weirdly meek warrior who fell like leaves in the wind, only to steal treasure from the chest the player just opened before running away. However, rather than encountering another boss inside the train, to everyone's surprise, on their first time through the game, the train itself became the boss at the end of the line, attacking the party. The fight has since become infamous due to the ability for Sabin to perform a suplex on the entire train, and the ridiculousness of the situation was very much in contrast with the emotional weight meant for the scenes on the Phantom Train, showing the aftermath of Kefka's villainy at Doma Castle and the impact it had on Cyan's family. But either way, the Phantom Train was definitely an odd enemy to square off against in almost every sense. But with that, they were 7 more of the most obscure monsters in Final Fantasy history, as selected by you, the commenters. How many of these monsters were you shocked and surprised by when you first saw them? Be sure to let us know in the comments below, as well as any other obscure monsters that you feel should have had a place on this list or the previous one. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, please feel free to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content. Alright everyone, with that, this is Daryl signing out. As always, I'd like to give a big thank you to all of our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, especially Benjamin Snow, CloudClone28, The Livestream, Gregory, Juan Jaramillo, Justin Dent, and Sukun TDK, who are super special Onion Knight supporters. And of course, a big thank you to everyone for watching this video. I'll see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.